The two parade floats showed no signs of stopping, a fact quickly corroborated by the Evie. Warning, collision imminent. So without hesitation, I made my moves. With one arm picking up the diminutive ferret, his whole body elongating like a slinky in the process, and the other arm poised to deploy the much-dreaded grappling hook aimed just above Oris's float. Grappler trajectory confirmed. Proceed? However, no sooner were those calculations made did the figureheads of both floats suddenly come to their senses, ordering their respective hallway-sized ego machines to an abrupt halt. Though it would quickly become clear that this wasn't done for the sake of the pedestrian. Instead, the two parties seemed to be first and foremost preoccupied amongst themselves. Does Lord Oris Ping of Pronathian Realm, fellow peer of the Transgression Academy for the Magical Arts, yield to the class sovereign candidate, Lord Quivratum? The hamster-like Wistario shrieked bombastically, earning nothing but an annoyed grunt from the ball. No, I do not yield, Ping shouted back, prompting Ladona to push forward with what I assumed to be a rebuttal. Does Lord Quivratum of Baralong Realm, fellow peer of the Transgression Academy for the Magical Arts, yield to the class sovereign candidate, Lord Oris Ping? Ladona shot back. No, I do not yield, Quiv declared, with a surprising degree of class compared to his bullish counterpart. All of this culminated in both would-be candidates shifting their attentions down from their thrones towards both me and the ferret merchant lord. Do you, Cadet Emma Booker of Earth Realm, fellow peer of the Transgression Academy for the Magical Arts, yada yada yada, I interrupted, letting my annoyance be known. First of all, let's take a step back. What's all of this actually about? I gestured frantically towards either float, decorated to the brim with mana-enriched metals, glistening with not just random specks of light, but outright patterns that range from flowers to intricate engravings, to even the signatures of either candidate. That question, whilst received with a series of nods from Quiv's group, seemed to be enough to give Ping the ammunition he needed to strike back. Ha! The new Roma once more shows her true colours, as one so lacking in the deeper nuances of the dynamics of power beyond mere feats of physical strength, he taunted, eliciting an uproarious series of laughs from his float members and followers, prompting me to tap my feet in response. You must have quite the selective memory, Lord Ping, because if I recall correctly, you of all people had first-hand experience with a certain library card belonging to yours truly, I stated bluntly, my hand tapping the pouch housing the aforementioned card. I assume that the library doesn't just hand out these things for mere feats of physical strength now, does it? The bull's eyes grew wide at that retort, Ladona's spindly hand seemingly the only thing keeping him from violently leaping out at me, as she gently massaged his shoulders in an attempt to calm him down. Quivratom, however, cleared his throat to call for our attention. Please be reasonable, Lord Ping. It's simply unreasonable to assume she, a new Roma with the barest grasp of our civil practices, has an answer to every question. So let's try to enlighten her in a civilized manner, yes? The bull refused to respond, simply shrugging as Quiff momentarily took the reins of the conversation. What you see before you are floats, New Realmer. They are part of a long-standing tradition, the procession for one's declaration to campaign for the position of class sovereign. Right, I nodded in acknowledgement. So, I'm guessing the class sovereign is like the de facto leader or representative of the year group or something? Correct, New Realmer, Quiv responded tactfully. It is a position which only one may hold for the duration of the entirety of the year group's enrollment within the academy. Cogs started turning in my head at that revelation, as it quickly became clear how class sovereign probably wasn't a clean one-to-one analogue of class president, but was once again probably yet another twisted mirror version of the institutions back home. So even the humble class president isn't safe from next-year-nification, huh? I'm assuming that there's no voting involved then, is there? I responded with a sigh, garnering a nod from Quiv and an indulgent huff from Ping. Define voting, New Realmer, the bull replied with a dismissive chuckle. Oh, come on. I know you guys at least have some concept of it, I began with an exasperated sigh. Voting? The process of choosing officials in positions of power or policies by declaring or casting your preference for said official or policy? And exactly why would we ever put such a time-honoured and storied position to the whims of the esoteric inclinations of the ravenous masses? Ping responded with an indignant huff. Yes, the concept of voting is not beyond us, but the act of voting, of casting your decision, is one which must be made amongst equals of heritage, pedigree, and titles. From the Peerage Council of Class Sovereigns to the Privy Council in His Eternal Majesty's Court, the act of voting is sacrosanct and must be reserved for those deserving of it. And even then, council decisions, no matter how unanimous, must ultimately always be subject to the will of the higher sovereign by decree or birthright. The Dean is to the class sovereigns what His Eternal Majesty is to the Privy Council, the ultimate voice amidst what are effectively extensions of his own power, Quiv concluded, garnering what was perhaps one of the few nods of acknowledgement from Ping. Right, so if not voting, how exactly is the class sovereign chosen? By Dean's decree, of course, Ping responded, with a self-satisfied smile. Haven't you been listening, New Realmer? If we're being pedantic about it, that would be the answer, I replied with an annoyed grunt, but I meant the actual process, Lord Ping. The prerequisite to even entering the challenge is to be a member of the top 7 peer groups by points, Quiv answered, following which a test of strength, a test of knowledge, and a test of magical prowess will be required. These tests differ from year to year, but it is the final test, the quest for the sword, which remains relatively similar year after year, Oris continued, jockeying the mantle of answering from Quiv. While the specifics change, the premise remains bound to the original myth surrounding the Academy's founding, a tale of a wizened monarch being chosen by the enlightened waterfolk of Lake Teliad, a test conducted by His Eternal Majesty's far-reaching sight and will. This monarch, who was drawn to a vision of this artifact, suffered hardship after hardship before being bestowed this marker of leadership at the hands of this venerable waterfolk, an artifact which he would later will to aid His Eternal Majesty in his ultimate quest to establish status Eternia. That rising tone of voice, coupled with his increasingly manic gesticulations, worried me greatly. But it wasn't out of fear of action or violence. No, it was fear of being trapped in another unskippable dialogue screen. And whilst I hated to admit that we had anything in common, it took one blabbermouth to understand when another blabbermouth was about to go all in on a particular subject of their fixation. This was one of those moments. Right, I nodded warily. Thanks for bringing me up to speed on this whole campaign you've got going on. But if you don't mind, I do have places to be, people to see, and so I think I'll be leaving now, I offered, before making a point to crane my head toward both directions. I don't suppose one of you guys could, back up or something? Backing up will be akin to yielding, New Realmer, Oris responded indignantly, prompting me to let out a sigh before taking a few purposeful steps back. Fine, I'll just make my own way out. Gosh, why do you always insist on making everything so freaking complicated? I responded for a half mumble, turning to the Eevee with a single, simple order. Eevee, sports mode, leapfrog. Eevee, leapfrog. Acknowledged. Activating sports mode. Custom preset. Leapfrog. With a sudden limberness felt throughout my body, and feeling as if I had suddenly been imbued with some temporary dex increase spell, I knelt down at the Eevee's virtual starting line, my eyes continuously trained on both the highlighted track in front of me and Oris's bewildered expression. Go. I sprinted forwards without warning, making a mad dash seemingly right towards Oris's float, before at the very last minute, leaping over it in a single pointed jump. The quadruple volume ceilings the Academy was so fond of using finally proved to be practical this time around, as it gave me more than ample airspace to make the leap up and over Oris's wedding cake of a campaign float. I couldn't help but to let out a wide grin as all eyes were once more on me and my little stunt, and as Oris's zealous fervour wavered into momentary dread upon seeing me outright lunging towards him, only to miss him by just a few inches. "Good luck in the whole class sovereign thing, guys," I shouted back for good measure, giving the bewildered crowd a solid wave. "This isn't over, New Realmer!" I could hear Ladona screeching in Oris's fear-stricken place as I went about my merry way down the corner, with Etholin still in tow. The poor thing was practically shaking now, even as I set him down as soon as we were out of earshot. "Sorry about that little stunt, Etholin," I offered with a nervous chuckle, reaching for the back of my neck in the process.
It is quite all right, Cadet Hemabuka,"
he offered meekly, and for a nervous chattering of his teeth.
"That was quite the feat of strength."
"It's nothing, really," I responded awkwardly. "Let's just continue where we left off, shall we?" The ferret nodded, once more leading the way as he slowly but surely transitioned back to his prior gait and posture. "So, yeah, I'd be more than happy to help you out with PE and all that. School stuff is the same in every realm, I imagine. It's a constant fight until graduation, so why not make that fight easier by lessening the burden amongst friends?" I continued, the mingling of my diplomatic and genuine side coming through, just like it did with the gang.
"Indeed, Cadet Hemabuka,"
Etholin nodded.
"I'd like that very much. And as stated previously, this request is not a blanket declaration. The terms of our mutual aid can very much be enacted as per a case-by-case basis."
"So not a wholesale mutual defense pact, but more so a friendly memorandum of understanding on the subject of mutual cooperation, subject to whatever the issue is on hand," I clarified.
Yes, in a manner of speaking,"
Etholin acknowledged, his brow perking upwards with interest.
"Considering this is the start of our working relationship, I believe it is prudent to set boundaries, so as to help establish the limits of our respective investments in either party."
The ferret took a moment to pause before correcting himself promptly.
"I do apologize if that is a bit too forward, Cadet Hemabuka. I will understand if you take offense to the cold and callous nature of—"
"It's all right, Etholin," I attempted to reassure him. "If anything, I appreciate the upfrontness. It's not just good business, but also solid diplomacy building, not mincing your words behind empty platitudes and such." The ferret nodded in understanding, a confidence which burned bright in his eyes, giving me a surge of confidence in this whole diplomatic endeavour, as the first seeds of relations beyond the confines of my peer group seemed to have just been planted. However, just before we arrived at the intersection of dynamically moving stairs, another thought quickly entered my head, as I realised I needed to broach this now before we parted ways. "Hey, Etholin, there's actually something I've been meaning to ask you since the Commoners District," I began, garnering a cock of the ferret's head.
"Oh?"
"Well, first off, I was going to ask you exactly how and why you're able to speak common and Nexian dialects, but I think your involvement in trade and commerce sort of makes that point self-explanatory." Etholin nodded in acknowledgement at that, before gesturing for me to continue. "Right, so, on to my main point then. I don't imagine many students have much of a reason to leave the ambassadorial district, so I'm curious as to what exactly you were doing out there," I asked plainly.
A very astute observation, Cadet Hemabuka."
Etholin perked up.
"I was merely doing my rounds, visiting those under my patronage and sponsorship, as is tradition for Rontalis realm merchant noblemen upon arrival at any foreign port. Such things are typically reserved for my bannermen, but given the exclusivity of Nexian visitation, it is typically expected for the issuer of charters and licenses themselves to make personal visits to their wards."
"Huh," I acknowledged with a nod. "So, from what I'm understanding, are you saying that the guy's ability to conduct business is entirely dependent on your official sponsorship? Like as a license issuer or something?"
"That is correct," Etholin nodded. "Commoners, unless under some form of a generational charter, must first acquire licenses or sponsorships from noble houses in order to conduct business or practice a certain trade. Whilst the details of this vary, My family has been well known to be very generous with our sponsorships.
Hence why you're known as a merchant lord, I clarified, causing the ferret's ears to dip somewhat. Sorry if that was offensive or anything, Atholin. I was just...
No. You are well within your rights to ask such questions. You are entirely alien to our ways, after all.
Again, I apologize if that was at all a faux pas. You don't need to answer...
The answer is yes, Cadet Emma Booker. There is something of a taboo when it comes to the generous issuance of licenses and sponsorships to commoners. Generally speaking, there exists an unspoken ratio as to what's considered acceptable rates of issuance. A ratio which is determined by a variety of factors, the simplest being the ratio between the amount of land the issuing noble house possesses and the number of sponsorships issued at any given time.
I'm imagining your house has a lot of licenses issued then, I offered.
In a manner of speaking, yes, Atholin affirmed, but then quickly clarified. We are within what is considered the tail end of the acceptable ratio. However, the issue arises in the diversity of our sponsorships, which most may see as non-existent. This is because most of our sponsorships trend towards the single-generation issuance of merchant licenses, rather than the patronage of trades such as those of the artisan charters, scribes, non-magical healers, seafarers, and so on and so forth.
I couldn't help but to remain entirely transfixed on this bit of the world's lore, as opposed to whatever Oris and Quiv were doing. This is also very fascinating, Atholin, I expressed with genuine delight, garnering a cock of Atholin's head, and a perplexed expression bordering on confused relief. There's definitely a lot to be said about trade houses. In fact, some of the most powerful noble houses in our history were the more trade-focused houses, so I definitely see the wisdom in going down this route. The ferret's eyes widened even further, his lips parting open as if he was taken by complete surprise.
Thank you, Cadet Emma Booker.
The ferret took a moment to dip his head towards me.
Suffice it to say, it is exceedingly rare to encounter those who consider my house's practices to be anything but unsavoury and undignified.
I'm not saying that trade itself is inherently unproblematic and without its own unique brand of issues, mind you. But what I am saying is that giving commoners under your care the right to empower themselves like this is certainly more noble in my book than simply keeping them from their aspirations. The ferret nodded deeply once more, as a smile formed across his face.
I will take that as an unusual compliment then. Thank you.
There was a genuine sense of giddiness that remained pervasive throughout his voice now, as the undercurrents of skittishness was punctuated by an overall renewed sense of pride, one that seemed otherwise non-existent whenever he was in the presence of other nobles. Don't mention it. I just say things as I see them, Atholin, which, given the time, probably means I should be saying goodbye for now, I responded, segueing into my departure from our little back and forth, as the Rontalis Realmer began walking off, one massive staircase at a time. The Transgression Academy for the Magical Arts. Healing Wing. Local time 20:55 hours. Emma. I wasted no time in storming the grand lobby of the Healing Wing, but the same could be said for the rejection I received upon arrival. As a lone, tired-looking hooded elf looked up from the reception desk, or at least what I assumed was a reception desk, hidden under piles upon piles of books, scrolls, and endless sheets of paperwork. I am afraid I cannot divulge the names of either student or faculty currently admitted within the inpatient wards of the Healing Wing. The sullen, sleep-deprived-looking elf apprentice spoke, for a malaise that even I felt sorry for. Well, I'm not exactly looking for a student or faculty member per se. She's an outsider that I'm pretty sure was admitted here by either Professor Chiska or Professor Vanavan. I attempted to clarify as politely, but insistently as I could. However, all I received in response was a tired sigh, as the half-lidded eyes of the elf barely even flinched, despite the obvious annoyance I was causing her. I am afraid I cannot divulge the names of any student, faculty, or others currently admitted within the inpatient wards of the Healing Wing, she reiterated, simply resorting to adding a clause to a canned response that I quickly found out to be a pre-written script beneath one of her many stacks of documents. "Can I just take a look or something? I promise I'll be out of your hair quick." A pause punctuated that question, as the elf plonked her gloved finger on her pre-written script before landing on an answer which she read verbatim. "I am sorry, but outsiders are not allowed inside past visiting hours. Please try again during visiting hours." She spoke slowly through a yawn, her consciousness threatening to leave her mortal coil. Looking around, I knew that forcing or even sneaking my way in probably wasn't the best way of going about this, given the sheer number of gargoyles present. So I disengaged for now. Though it was clear I wasn't the only one to disengage from this battle. Plonk! My rearview cameras confirmed that the elf in question had finally succumbed to the call of slumber, papers now scattering following her unfortunate faceplant. A golem soon arrived to drop a heavy blanket over her now lifeless form. Dragon's Heart Tower, Level 23, Residence 30, Local Time 21:15 hours. Emma. I arrived to find a relatively relaxed atmosphere in the dorm, with Thacia silently reading a book, downing cups of tea in the process. Thalmin having had just returned from the gym, his attention now entirely consumed by the small batch of homework I just remembered we were assigned. And finally, Eleanor, busy doing much of the same. It was almost a bit of an emotional whiplash to be seeing everyone in full school mode, following the back-to-back adventures. I could almost forgive myself for forgetting we even had grades to worry about sometimes. Almost being the operative word here. "Evie?" "Yes, Cadet Booker." "Do you think you can do my homework for me?" "Please? It's mission sensitive." "Does the mission operator wish to classify school assignments as mission sensitive?" "Yes. We're not on Earth, so this doesn't fall under the VIAI Academic Misconduct Act, okay? Please just dedicate some of your processing power for this. You can allocate the bare minimum if you want to. Just print it out or something when you're done. I'm sure it'll be fine." "Acknowledged. Thanks, Evie." I beamed back, taking a sigh of relief for actually being able to expedite one of the more laborious tasks here. "Homework, I'm guessing?" I asked the gang, who all nodded, save for Thacia. "I've already completed my assignments. You may take a look if you wish to, Emma," Thacia offered candidly. "Nah, it's fine. I'm finishing mine right now, actually," I beamed out brightly, tapping my helmet in the process, preemptively addressing the questions which were undoubtedly coming my way. "In here, just processing it all as we speak." "Right," Eleanor responded, half unamused, half tired from my shenanigans. "I am not even going to dignify that with a response," he sighed, choosing to disengage, which was probably the best thing he could do tonight. Getting into the existence of the Eevee was a whole can of worms unto itself. "Fair enough. In any case, I had a question I wanted to ask you guys about. Several, actually," I began, as I sat down on the couch. "Go ahead, Emma," Thacia acknowledged, choosing to sit opposite of me. "The search for Reela is currently hitting a bit of a roadblock, so I've come up with 2 paths I'd like to run by you." 10 minutes later. "Correction, you have 1 path ahead of you, Emma," Thacia answered definitively, leaving no room for argument or discourse. "I'm assuming it's not the idea where we attach Reela's bracelet to a drone, then having it circle around the medical wing to see if it'd activate?" "No, Emma." Thacia doubled down, in a way that only a stern partner could. With a sigh and a firm grip of her forehead, she quickly continued. "It is your second idea that I am more comfortable with, though this begs the distressing question as to exactly how and why the more sane idea was your second thought." "I guess I'm just a bit impatient is all," I responded, awkwardly rubbing the back of my helmet in the process. "I guess we'll go with the more straightforward option then. We'll just ask Chiska about the whole Reela thing whenever she's free, and then push for a visit. It does seem like the underwhelming way of going about it, though." "Yes, Emma," Thacia acknowledged with an exasperated breath. underwhelming often is the best way of going about it. Following which, should the results of this venture prove questionable, then we will discuss the possibility of escalation.
Yeah, you're right. It's the same idea with just asking for the book from Lariel instead of stealing it, I guess. I nodded in understanding. Thacia had taken a moment to exhale a sigh of relief in tempering my more flighty ideas.
You mentioned you had more topics to discuss, Emma, Thacia questioned, following the downing of an entire cup of tea.
Yeah, actually, two things. The first being the whole class sovereign situation. Ah, I assume the would-be crown aspirers are finally out on their floats? Eleanor chimed in with a dismissive puff.
Yeah, actually, Quiv and Oris. They explained the whole thing to me already, but I was wondering...
Oh, please don't tell me you've gotten yourself into another quagmire, Emma. Eleanor muttered out, with both hands covering his face, muffling his voice in the process.
No. I kinda just got out of there as soon as I realized what it was all about.
Eleanor stopped to give me a more relaxed look. Oh, he responded, matching Thacia's sigh of relief.
If anything, I was wondering, since we're currently the 5th in terms of points, if any of you were thinking of running for class sovereign.
The thought did cross my mind, Eleanor acknowledged. However, following the incident with a certain Black Robe professor, any boons which could have been gained from such a coveted title would almost certainly be overshadowed by the consequences of being trapped in close proximity to the Black Robe professor's office. The Venerian seethed, his eyes landing on my own. You can see why that would be less than optimal considering my experiences and our current standing?
Yeah, that makes sense, I nodded. That's actually very reasonable of you, Eleanor. I thought that you'd be chasing after titles like...
A climber of the social ladder as I may be, I know how to make informed decisions, he interjected.
But only after you've had your eyes opened by a near-death experience, Thamin chimed in, garnering a glare from the Venerian. I'm simply saying that life can be a harsh teacher. Being close to death means you have a renewed appreciation for life and caution.
Ugh! I've had enough of your Havenbrockian platitudes for one day, Prince Thalmin,
Eleanor rebutted, garnering a shrug from Thalmin, as he just as quickly dropped back down into his homework. You know, I think you made the right call here, Eleanor. A silly quest where you go around trying to find a sword is no basis for a system of governance, not even a student government. Strange fish people lying in lakes, distributing swords is no basis for a system of government. I mean, if I went around saying I was Emperor of the Halls just because some slimy frog creature lobbed a trident at me, everyone would call me crazy. Supreme executive power derived from some farcical aquatic ceremony is just ridiculous. Silence threatened to creep in following that, but Thacia was quick to make short work of any lulls in the conversation. And your next point, Emma? This group was a tough crowd sometimes. Oh, well, this is actually kind of a big one, and I'm actually curious why you guys seem to be rather lax about this whole thing, I began, garnering a cock of Thacia's head. It's about tomorrow's house-choosing ceremony. I'm just wondering what it actually entails and why you guys seem so calm about it. That question seemed to snap something in Eleanor's mind, as he got up from his pile of homework and walked purposely right towards me.
Isn't it obvious, Earthrealmer? It is because we have given up!
My brow quickly perked up at that, as I turned to both Thacia and Thalmin with a confused glance, obscured by the helmet. What?
If it needs to be spelled out, the house-choosing ceremony is an explicitly magic-oriented affair. The moment you sat at our table, joining our peer group, was the moment where we all understood we would have practically no chance at accruing the points necessary to get first pick of our desired house. Moreover, the moment you proved yourself to be entirely mannerless was the moment where any lingering hope completely died. Eleanor surmised with a frustrated seal. Is this true, guys? I turned to face both Thacia and Thalmin. The latter seemed to be putting up a positive face, hiding the emotion stirring within.
As much as it pains me to acknowledge that something this superficial was another cause of my early grievances against you, Emma, I must stand by the truth and admit that, yes, this was the case. However, looking back at the circumstances now, the That sense of frustration seems so far away and childish in retrospect. The houses seem so small now, especially compared to what we've gone through and what we can build together in spite of Nexian conventions.
Thamon's reply felt so unabashedly genuine, so much so that I didn't know how to process this sudden influx of thoughts and feelings. Actually, Eleanor, I had no such drive for the house-choosing ceremony from the onset, given my tainted status. Thacia shrugged. I understood, from the moment I entered that portal, that the house-choosing ceremony would be yet another event to be tolerated.
But I had such hopes,
Eleanor countered, though his tone of voice was rife with a sense of defeatism.
That is your answer, Ephraima. The house-choosing ceremony is simply a battle we cannot fight.
A silence finally descended on our group as I was left to ponder everything. So, what exactly is expected from this whole house-choosing ceremony thing? Like, will there be challenges like during PE, or... It's something of a show of magical prowess, Emma, Thacia explained. With limited guidelines as to how this is done, simply that all displays must be conducted exclusively through magical processes. So, a magical talent show.
That's a reductive way to put it,
Eleanor acknowledged through a soot-filled puff. Please understand that this isn't at all a serious matter, Emma, Thacia clarified with a smile.
It's ultimately another mechanism of the Academy's control,
Thamon acknowledged with a nod.
And given everything we've been through, it's just not really worth the trouble.
The next several minutes would be spent racking my head around the whole situation. Whilst I understood that everyone had more or less moved past what was effectively a tool of Nexian social conventions, I still couldn't help but to feel just a little bit responsible for potentially ruining what could have at least been a fun event for the gang, an opportunity for them to flex their magical skills. I wanted to at least give them a chance to flex in front of the student body. Internal process completed. Homework. Note to operator. Bare minimum memory allocation was used for this process. Human review is recommended. It was then that a light bulb moment hit me, and my eyes lit up like fireworks. This event didn't need to involve my usual tricks. It didn't need me to overcome or overcompensate for my inability to practice magic. Drones, fireworks, light shows, all disqualifiers, just weren't needed in this event. This was their show. I just needed to do the bare minimum. And there was at least one magic trick I could do whilst adding something to the score, without detracting from the gang's performance. Actually, I have an idea, I offered, with a wide, mischievous grin.